Direct from our newsroom in New York, in color, this is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite and Eric Severine in Washington, Dan Rather in Washington, Bill Plant in Detroit, Mike Stanley in Washington, Terry Drinkwater in Pasadena, George Herman in Washington, and Joel Bernstein in Detroit.
Good evening. Arab guerrillas in the Middle East announced today that all Americans still being held hostage from those hijacked planes will be treated as Israelis, and declared they all will be held until Israel agrees to a prisoner exchange. The State Department says there are between 23 and 38 Americans among those 55 hostages, not all of whom are Jewish. The United States, using strong language, then told Palestinian plane hijackers that it will not tolerate the holding of American citizens as hostages. We have a report from CBS News White House correspondent Dan Rather.
The statement issued tonight by White House News Secretary Ronald Ziegler says in part, and I quote, "The continued illegal detention of persons with United States passports is wholly unacceptable. We deplore and denounce the holding of hostages by any nation. We reject any attempt to make any distinction among U.S. citizens on any basis whatever." End of the partial quotation. It is unquestionably the strongest presidential reaction yet in the Mideast skyjack crisis. Ziegler specifically said that the statement came against the background of reports from the Middle East about U.S. citizens being held considered Israelis. Some of these hostages carry Israeli as well as U.S. passports, and Ziegler's statement appeared to be designed primarily to make it clear to terrorists that such persons are considered unequivocally U.S. citizens. Ziegler gave what most reporters present considered deliberately vague answers to any questions involving Arabs rounded up and held hostage in Israel. Ziegler said he had no information on those hostages. Dan Rather, CBS News, Washington.
Israel's Foreign Minister Abba Eban held a news conference today to discuss the hijack situation and the guerrillas' demands for the release of comrades from Western and Israeli jails in exchange for their captives. And in the process of his comments, Eban gave a rare display of temper.
Discussions about a possibility of the release of 7 conspicuous saboteurs and hijackers, 3 of them in Switzerland, 3 of them in Germany, and 1 of them for the last week in England. Now, it's quite certain that these governments are being asked by the terrorists to carry out extra legal actions and to commit an offense to the legal integrity of the states concerned. But the only state whose security would be damaged by the release of these 7 people is Israel, because these people have tried and will try to kill Israelis. They killed Peres, the navigator on El Al. They killed Katzenstein at Munich. They mutilated Hannah Meron. On their release, they will try to kill more Israelis.
Mr. Beerman, please. Prime Minister, is not Israel in danger of playing into the hands of Arab extremists by adopting a policy of mass arrests on the West Bank and making the, so far, relatively mild occupation seem, in the eyes of the world, oppressive?
Nonsense. Absurd.
Is this not the impression which may be ridiculous?
Israel has decided to stand fast and test the nerves of the Arab hijackers. No deals involving imprisoned guerrilla commandos will be offered to the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, at least not for the time being. And Jerusalem hopes the Western governments in the negotiations will hold firmly to their demand that all the remaining hijacked airline passengers must be released without exceptions. Clearly, this is the time that will test not only the determination of the guerrillas, but the convictions of West Germany, Switzerland, the United States, and Britain as well. 2 well-known Arabs were dispatched to Jordan with a message for the front's leaders. They were told to caution the guerrillas that the hijacking could have an ominous effect on Israel's occupation policies unless the last of the passengers are released. The government makes no guarantees that its new tactics will succeed, but Israel's current mood is not to capitulate, and it asks the Western governments not to break solidarity under the pressure of the guerrilla threats and make separate deals for their own countrymen. Larry Pomeroy, CBS News, Tel Aviv.
Symptomatic of the current confusion in the Mideast was the Red Cross report last week that an American woman hostage had given birth on board one of the hijacked planes. The Red Cross provided all sorts of information about the condition of mother and child and the efficiency of their medical teams in the desert in treating them. Today, the Red Cross said, in effect, "Whoops, sorry, there was no such birth," and they couldn't explain how the error was made. The man shot and killed while trying unsuccessfully to hijack that El Al airliner a week ago Sunday apparently was a U.S. citizen. British government sources identified him today as Patrick Joseph Anguello, who was born and educated in California, but lived later in Nicaragua. Anguello was about 27 years old, reportedly was known as a political agitator in Latin America, but had no previously known connections with Arab guerrillas. A group of 3 men, a woman, and 2 children hijacked a Romanian plane on the way from Bucharest to Prague, Czechoslovakia, and forced it to fly to Munich in West Germany. About 80 persons were reported on that plane. President Nixon, who has ordered armed guards on some U.S. flights, today asked Congress for $28 million for aircraft security, the bulk of it for recruiting and training 2,500 guards.
You buy Prestone antifreeze, huh?
Sure, it's got a protection plan that's ironclad, ironclad, ironclad.
Oh, what?
A protection plan that's ironclad, ironclad, ironclad. Look, Prestone protects against freeze-ups, protects against corrosion, protects against most minor leaks, or right union carbide for your money back. See? Yeah. Never pick up a stranger. Pick up Prestone, its protection plan.
It's ironclad, 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 right?
Right.
The negotiations go on in Detroit with little hope of averting a strike. At more than half a dozen General Motors plants in the United States and Canada, angry auto workers today jumped the gun and began striking early. Some of the early walkouts took place right in Detroit, and Bill Plant reports.
With the strike deadline set for midnight, there were some who would not wait. Wildcat walkouts against General Motors occurred in several cities, this one a Cadillac plant in Detroit. The men on the picket line reflected the militant mood of many in the union.
Living working conditions, whole thing.
How long are you willing to stay out?
Hey, until we get it. Until we get it.
Maybe they think they got us beat or something. Maybe they figure they got a bluff in or something. Huh?
Right.
General Motors, I mean, well, we can show them that we mean business.
There are 2 major issues. A demand for a return to the unlimited cost of living increases which the union enjoyed until it gave them up in 1967, and the right to retire at a $500 a month pension after 30 years' service. As UAW spokesman said flatly that a strike could not be avoided, each side last night blamed the other for their failure to settle.
I really believe that the General Motors Corporation a short time ago made a decision to take a strike because they want to wrap up altogether their local negotiations, their Canadian situation, and this national settlement. And that is why I really believe they are taking this hard and fast, non-negotiating position, because they really have other fish to fry. So in this atmosphere of non-negotiable items, non-bargaining, we are not going to have a non-strike, we're going to have a real strike.
Let me say these are the strangest negotiations I've been in 25 years. UAW always starts a negotiation with fantastic demands. They're usually deliberately vague about some of the important demands. The demands this year were more fantastic and more vague than usual.
At Local 22, members lined up to pay their dues so as to be eligible for strike benefits from the UAW's $120 million strike fund. Some, particularly younger members and those with families, were less than enthusiastic at the prospect of a strike.
Well, from my opinion, this is definitely not the time for a strike, for me, because I would much rather be working myself, they want to strike right now, And there's some talk that maybe around Christmas time before we can go back to work, and that's no good for me, It's fun.
Is this going to be a hardship on you, your family, if there's a strike?
It's bound to be. I mean, there's 4 of us all together, a wife and 2 children. And it's hard to make ends meet if a person just works one job right now.
With a strike at midnight, which will idle some 350,000 General Motors employees, all but certain now, there are workers in this plant as well as many others who will be coming out shortly into a chilly rain, not knowing how many lean weeks lie ahead. Bill Plant, CBS News, Detroit.
Simultaneously, the Nixon administration is wondering whether to intervene and block a nationwide rail strike, also scheduled for midnight. The story from Mike Stanley in Washington.
Negotiations are expected to go on until the midnight deadline in an effort to head off the threatened strike. Despite a report of flexibility in the positions of the National Railway Labor Conference, representing 190 carriers, and 4 unions with some 500,000 railroad employee members, they remain far apart, and Assistant Labor Secretary W.J. Ussery is not optimistic a negotiated settlement can be reached tonight.
I am very sorry to say, as of now, we have not been able to arrive at any agreement. We're going to continue to work at it through the evening. I must confess that the future does not look very bright toward getting agreement by midnight tonight. Usually, if you know me, I'm pretty optimistic about resolving a dispute. But when they are so far apart in money and other fringe benefits that at this late hour it looks very hopeless to get an agreement by midnight.
President Nixon could postpone the strike for 60 days. Some administration officials, however, are urging that he allow a strike for a few days anyway, thereby underlining the need for expanded presidential powers to deal with transit disputes. But other administration members argue against such inaction, lest it provide Democrats with a political issue for November. Mike Stanley, CBS News, Washington.
On Labor Day, in a move with political overtones, President Nixon entertained some 100 top-ranking labor leaders at a White House dinner. Well, now he's followed up with a letter to each of them, and in it he noted that they had expressed concern about the nation's high rate of unemployment and vowed that the administration, he said, is doing all it can to fight joblessness. In the president's words, "You can be sure that my administration will never follow an unemployment strategy in its approach to the economy." The First Pennsylvania Bank of Philadelphia has decided to lower its prime interest rate from 8 to 7.5% effective tomorrow. The major New York banks gave no immediate indication that they'd follow suit. Word of this crack in the 8% interest wall caused a brief rally on the New York Stock Exchange, but then the averages declined to a net loss for the day. Volume was 11,900,000 shares. The average price per share was down 18 cents on the New York Exchange and 3 cents lower on the American Exchange.
Announcing a powerful top job smell we call new ammonia power. Top Job's got what it takes to clean your kitchen floor, where tracked in dirt's only part of the problem. The other part is cooking grease that forms a film locking in the dirt. Top Job cuts the grease and gets the dirt. New stronger smelling Top Job. It cuts the grease and gets the dirt.
What about Pam? You can tell your mother, Harold. Her job, this apartment, so much to take care of.
She can handle it. Pam's a genius.
I could come over and help with the laundry. New shirt?
No, Pam washed it. She used this.
Salvo and tablets. Looks easy.
Pam says it makes life a little bit simpler.
Oh, hey, you two talking about me.
Simple, sure Salvo tablets. Real help for the busy working woman.
The school busing controversy took 2 forms in California today: the start of a massive busing program in Pasadena and the signing of a state anti-busing law to take effect November 21st. Terry Drinkwater reports.
Governor Ronald Reagan set the stage today for another court test in California of busing to achieve school integration. He signed a bill to outlaw busing without the consent of the parents of each student.
Judicial rulings intended to force compulsory busing on parents and families against their wishes and without their consent have distressed the vast majority of our citizens who strongly oppose racial discrimination, but who understandably view mandatory busing as a ridiculous waste of time and public money, which could seriously undermine all efforts to improve the quality of our public schools. Besides hampering the quality of education our children need and deserve by siphoning off millions of dollars in school funds which could otherwise be used for books, new classrooms, teachers, and maintenance, forced busing would also deprive them of the natural environment of the neighborhood school.
The very day the governor signed the anti-busing bill into law, the most extensive busing program ever undertaken in a city outside the South began in Pasadena, California. Here the court had ordered integration. 15,000 students were moved by bus, half of the youngsters who live in the district commuting to school today for the first time. there was some slight confusion, delays, as neither drivers nor youngsters knew quite where they were supposed to go. Most parents seemed to go along with the plan. A few did not.
I don't like it, not with the taxes, and we're within walking distance of 3 schools right here that we have to bus our children. We're strictly against it right now.
I'm for it. I think it's the answer to Pasadena's problems.
The youngsters generally seemed to like the new plan. More of them were in schools dominated by their own age group. Kindergarten through 3rd grade in one school, grades 4 through 6 in another, and so on. There were no racial incidents, no friction between the youngsters. Despite the calm on the campuses, the specter of buses is a major political issue in Pasadena. 3 school board members who worked on the plan now face a recall election. One of the candidates challenging them is Frank Crowhurst.
Well, Judge Reel passed a decision against the Pasadena School Board that we felt was unconstitutional. Now, we feel that the school board should have appealed that decision. They didn't do it. So we have started a recall election, and that's what we're having. We live in a free and open society, and this is what Mr. Nixon has said also. And I think because of that, that we should have our right to choose our own neighborhood schools.
Well, I think the recall was always an unfortunate thing for the community, not because I'm involved, but because it tears the community apart. Now, what will happen in the election is something that I am unable to predict at this time, but I do think that it will be a fruitless effort no matter how you look at it, because the decision basically was the judge's decision.
But you expect to be back after the recall? You expect to win?
I expect to be, but at the same time I would like to say that it's a touch-and-go situation.
The political issues are far too complicated, of course, for these 5-year-olds leaving McKinley Elementary School this afternoon by bus for home. But with the anti-busing bill signed today by the governor, and with the new militants of the recall campaign here, the Pasadena integration battle is far from over. Terry Drinkwater, CBS News, Pasadena.
In Bogalusa, Louisiana, scattered fights broke out today between white and black pupils at a high school, and all 11 of the city schools have been closed until further notice. Bogalusa police used tear gas to stop the fighting. At a House hearing today, both the big business and big labor opposed the Nixon administration's proposed tax on the lead in gasoline. AFL-CIO's Andrew B. Miller called it a license to pollute if you pay the price. And Walker Winter of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce called it a penalty and an undesirable precedent. Winter said it would hit hardest at lower-income persons with older cars. The Senate passed and sent to the House a bill designed to encourage the training of more family doctors. The measure would provide $425 million in grants for medical schools to set up separate departments for general practitioners. The bill's outlook in the House, though, is doubtful. A year ago, the Food and Drug Administration announced that a whole class of prescription drugs for colds and other respiratory ailments simply doesn't work. Well, today, the FDA went further and ordered 15 brands within this class off the market. However, industry sources noted that about half the brands already had been removed voluntarily. The useless drugs were all combinations of antibiotics mixed with either antihistamines, analgesics, or decongestants. The Pornography Commission has agreed to delay its report until September 30th, thus giving dissenters more time to prepare a minority report. With that development, a federal judge in Washington today dismissed the suit to delay the report filed by Commission member Charles Keating, Jr., the only Nixon appointee on the commission.
Nice fresh cherries, Mrs. Tate?
Cherries? Oh, Pete, they'll stain my dentures.
Well, don't you know about Efferdent?
Efferdent?
Well, it's the tablet I use. Watch.
It's turning blue.
That means Efferdent's bubbles are scrubbing away its stain and odor. When the blue disappears, dentures are cleaned.
I'll try it. Pete, your Efferdent really cleans.
Cherries are still in.
I'll take a box.
Efferdent removes stubborn stains between teeth in minutes.
Thanks for the tip, mister. What does he think this is, a depression or something? You know, I haven't had a decent tip all day. I mean, a girl could starve to death in this business. I don't know, you think I have bad breath or something?
Here. Just my Listerine.
Ooh, that's strong.
Strong to last long, Louise. And Listerine kills germs that can cause bad breath.
Anything for a tip? $1? Hey, mister, thanks for the tip.
Listerine antiseptic kills germs, lasts for hours.
The leader of the Viet Cong delegation to the Vietnam peace talks in Paris, Mrs. Nguyen Thuy Binh, said today she would favor secret talks with the United States. But she said that the chief U.S. negotiator, Ambassador David Bruce, has not, in her words, taken any initiative for private negotiations. In Cambodia, government troops suffered heavy losses in what was described as their most ambitious offensive of the war. They attempted to recapture an important road junction 55 miles north of Phnom Penh, but were routed by communist mortar and artillery fire. At least 100 of the Cambodians were reported killed or wounded. There have been new developments in efforts by an arch-conservative New Jersey preacher to bring South Vietnam's vice president to Washington for a pro-Vietnam War rally. That story from George Herman.
The Reverend Carl McIntyre, sponsor of a Win the War rally in Washington last spring, wants South Vietnamese Vice President Nguyen Cao Ky as the main speaker at a similar rally here October 3rd. Mr. McIntyre says the United States government has tried to keep Vice President Ky from coming. But after this weekend visit in Saigon, McIntyre told a news conference today that the Vice President is undeterred by official pressures.
He has accepted our invitation. He authorized me to say that he had not altered in any way his original decision to accept the invitation of the United States March for Victory Committee to speak in this city on October the 3rd. He already has the first draft of his speech prepared, which I'm not going to reveal except to say that he will be another Agnew, and he will out-Agnew Agnew when it comes to the type of language and rhetoric that is called for at the present moment. And may I say that if there are to be demonstrations, if there are demonstrations against him, the effect of these demonstrations will solidify the sentiment behind him and behind us for our victory program. And it will certainly affect the elections. And may I put it in this way, if we do have demonstrations, November the 3rd will be open season on doves, and there'll be no hunting license required.
The fundamentalist preacher said he expects Vice President Ky to help draw an audience of 500,000 people, and he adds that Ky will be available at the invitation of Chairman Mendel Rivers to meet with the members of the House Armed Services Committee. Chairman Rivers' office told us it knows nothing of any such plan. George Herman, CBS News, Washington.
President Nixon today chose his 24-year-old daughter Tricia to be a trustee of the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. She'll serve a 10-year term on the board of the center, still under construction, which is meant to be the main Washington memorial to President Kennedy. To fill another seat on the board, the president named one of his top assistants, H.R. Haldeman.
Long before Marlboro country, the West was New York City.
Yeah, the West was New York City 200 years ago. Then it started moving westward with a long, long way to go. Oh, the West moved west heading for Chicago, but it never ever settled down. It just kept on moving westward toward the land of the big sundown. Across the wide Missouri, across the mountains high, the West moved west till it came to rest in the blue Pacific sky.
Till today, the West is everywhere, and everywhere is Marlboro country.
Everywhere from New York City to the blue Pacific sky.
Come to Marlboro country.
395! 395!
I'm Dick Butkus. Plugging holes is my business. Plugging holes is Prestone's business too. Prestone anti-leak antifreeze. It's got a protection plan that's ironclad. Prestone will stop most minor leaks anywhere in your cooling system, or write Union Carbide for your money back. So when it comes to plugging holes, get Prestone with the ironclad protection plan.
From Washington tonight, Eric Severide has some observations on the nation's troubled campuses and the students who inhabit them.
If there is a national religion in America, it is education. The scores of major congressional acts in aid of education go back to the Continental Congress predating the Constitution. Education was a road upward for the individual. The truth could be found and would not only make men free, but keep them free. For the first time in the human story, education was to be open to immense masses of people, and a new kind of society was built. As the universities warily reopen this fall, both the theory and the practice are in deep trouble. Campuses that got along with one sleepy, unarmed policeman now maintain squads of armed men. A university presidency was once the most respected position in the country. Now they go begging, and some presidents have bodyguards. In the country of the indulgent youth cult, in a period of spreading contempt for traditional values and processes and contemporary authority, the college student population has swollen to around 8 million. And faculties, to keep up with this, have swollen with tens of thousands of ever younger teachers, emotionally not much different from the students and with the same life experience. The intellectually newborn are teaching the newborn. At the top level, these students may well be the best ever, excepting perhaps the returned GIs after World War II, the best informed and most mature. At the bottom level, which includes unprecedented numbers driven in by parental and social pressures and fear of the draft, they are pretty surely the worst ever, the most self-indulgent, the most illiterate and lazy-minded. So the pressure is intense not to drive them up to the old standards of performance, but to drive the standards down to their level. Some, however unprepared, will rise and make it by their own hard efforts. A great many will end up with degrees and no education worth the name. Centers of learning have flourished and created in the middle of great social violence. The Renaissance period was one example. And for that matter, when the city of Chicago was very nearly ruled by gangsters 40 years ago, the University of Chicago reached its peak as a great center of learning. But violence within the centers is something else, and a new experience for this country. When the general society is uncertain as to what it wants and where it is going, it is not strange that universities, too, are unsure of what they are supposed to be and do. One thing seems clear: they cannot find a new road and role in the absence of essential order. And it begins to seem clear that only the orderly students themselves can subdue the disorderly amongst them. If they can't or won't, the state must do it, the worst possible remedy. The policeman's club can open a skull. It has never yet opened a mind.
That's the way it is. Monday, September 14th, 1970. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News. Good night.
When American Motors introduced the Gremlin, people found out that it doesn't cost a lot of money to own a car that's fun to drive. The idea has spread all over the country. The Albuquerque 8. The Wichita Wiggle. The Tallahassee Two-Step. The Boston Bounce. The Chicago Shuffle. 6 months ago, coming out with a car the size and price of the Gremlin was a gamble, but American Motors took it. If you had to compete with the 3 biggest car companies in America, what would you do?
Direct from our newsroom in New York, in color, this has been the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite. 60 Minutes premieres the new season with a look at Gershwin's Porgy and Bess, performed in Catfish Row. And a futuristic view of cable television, tomorrow night at 10, 9 Central Time. Ricardo Montalban guest stars as a fugitive whom Marshall Dillon is pursuing on the season premiere of Gunsmoke at 7:30 Eastern Time on CBS.